The air was heavy in the slave market. Thick smoke from the burning torches made it hard to breathe, and the cries of the desperate filled the night sky. Iron cages lined the dusty street, each one holding beings from different worlds. Some were strong, their eyes full of hate. Others were weak, their bodies trembling with fear. Among them was a young alien girl. Her skin shimmered faintly under the dim light. Marked with scars from old whips, her silver eyes held no hope, only silence. She knew what was coming. For days she had been passed from cage to cage, beaten whenever she tried to resist. Now her thin hands were bound in chains as she was dragged to the center platform. The crowd roared. Merchants shouted numbers. Buyers pushed forward with greedy eyes. Some wanted her as a servant. Others, for darker reasons they did not bother to hide. The girl's heart pounded. She braced herself for pain, because that was all she had ever known. Every owner before had brought her nothing but suffering. Then, through the noise, a figure appeared. A man not like the others. His hair was streaked with gray. His clothes were rough and patched. His face looked tired, but his eyes were steady. He was human, and the crowd whispered as he stepped closer. Humans rarely came to this market. When they did, it was never for kindness. The auctioneer laughed, pulling the girl forward roughly so all could see her. He lifted her chin high, showing her face to the buyers. Look at her, rare blood, strong bones, still young, she will serve. For years, he shouted, his words cut like knives. The girl lowered her eyes, refusing to meet the gaze of those who wanted to own her. The man raised his hand. His voice was calm. I will buy her, he said. The crowd erupted in laughter. Some mocked him, others cursed. No one believed a worn-out human farmer could afford such a rare slave. But when he dropped a small pouch of shining coins on the table, the laughter stopped. The auctioneer's eyes widened. He counted quickly, then grinned. Sold, he declared. The chains were unlocked and the girl was pushed toward the man. She stumbled, falling at his feet. Her knees scraped against the rough stone. She did not cry. She had forgotten how to. The man reached down, not to strike her, but to lift her gently. His touch was strange. It carried no cruelty, only quiet strength. The girl froze. Her body stiffened like stone. She thought it was a trick. She thought pain would come any second, but nothing came. The man only said, "Come," and turned away. They walked out of the market together. The crowd's jeers followed them. She will break him in a day, someone shouted, a waste of money. Another spat. The girl heard it all, and she believed it too. For in her heart, she knew no human could be different. Every step she took was heavy. Each sound made her flinch. She braced for the blow that had not yet come. The road outside the market was long and empty. The night was cold. A thin moon watched from above. The man did not speak. His silence was not cruel. It was calm. He carried no whip, no chain, only a small lantern that lit their path. The girl followed with slow steps, still waiting for the mask of kindness to fall away. In her mind, memories screamed. She saw faces of those who had owned her before, their laughter, their anger, their endless punishments. She had learned long ago that trust was dangerous. She whispered to herself in her own tongue, words of warning. Do not believe. Do not hope. At last they stopped at a broken fence. Beyond it lay a road leading to nowhere. The man paused and looked back at her. His eyes were not hard like the others. They were tired, but steady. He said only one word. Safe. The girl did not understand. Safe was a word that meant nothing to her. Safe was a dream that always ended in pain. She lowered her eyes and clutched the chains that still hung from her wrists. Her heart beat fast, not with hope, but with fear. And yet, in that moment, something strange stirred inside her. His silence was different. His touch had been different. For the first time in years, she felt a question inside her heart. A question she had never dared to ask before. Could this human be unlike the rest? She did not know the answer. But as the market fires burned behind her and the man walked ahead without pulling her chain, the question refused to leave. The road stretched endlessly into the night. The slave market's noise faded behind them, replaced by the quiet crunch of their footsteps on the dry earth. The human man walked steadily, holding his lantern low. Its dim light drew long shadows across the ground. The alien girl followed close, her wrists still bound in heavy iron. Each step felt like walking toward another prison. Her heart pounded. In her chest, every silence made her anxious. She had known cruel masters who shouted orders, who cursed and struck, but this one said nothing. His silence was not sharp. It was deep. The girl did not know whether to fear it more than words. She kept her eyes on his back, waiting, watching for the moment he would turn and reveal his true face. The chains rattled softly with each movement, and their sound echoed in her ears. Like a cruel reminder, she wanted to believe that maybe he was different, but her body would not let her. Memories forced her to brace for pain again and again. Even when his steps slowed so she could keep up, she only shrank back more. The night grew colder. A wind swept across the empty fields, carrying the smell of dust and ash. The girl shivered. Her thin clothes offered no warmth. She expected him to ignore her. Yet without a word, he stopped and unwrapped a rough, patched cloak from his shoulders. He placed it around her. The girl froze. The cloak was heavy and warm. She gripped its edges tightly, staring at him with wide silver eyes. She whispered in her own tongue, words that trembled like her lips. Why? But he did not answer. He only turned back and continued walking. This silence unsettled her more than cruelty would have. Cruelty was clear, predictable, but kindness without explanation felt dangerous. Was it another trick? A way to make her lower her guard before the blow came? The stars above glittered like shards of broken glass. She lifted her gaze to them, trying to escape the thoughts in her mind. Once, long ago, her mother had told her that stars were safe places, that each one carried a soul that could watch over them. But her mother was gone, lost in the same markets that had stolen her freedom. The stars had never helped. They had only watched as she suffered. The man's lantern flickered as they reached a narrow path through jagged rocks. The silence of the night was broken only by the sound of distant animals calling in the dark. Shadows moved on the edges and fear tightened in her chest. She thought perhaps he was leading her into the wilds to abandon her. That would be easier than chains, she thought. Easier than more pain. But then he spoke. His voice was low, like gravel dragged across the earth. "Careful," he said, pointing at loose stones on the path. It was only one word, but it startled her more than a shout. It was the first time he had spoken to her, and it was not an order, not a command, but a warning to keep her safe. Her steps faltered. She almost stumbled. Her chains scraped against the rock. She clutched the cloak tighter and lowered her head. She wanted to ask why again, but the words died on her tongue, for slaves did not ask questions. They obeyed or they suffered. That had always been the rule. Hours passed, and still he walked. His back was straight but heavy with weariness. She could see it in the way his shoulders bent when he thought she was not looking. He was no rich master, no powerful lord. His hands were scarred, his boots worn thin. If he wanted a servant, why choose her? A broken girl, scarred and weak? The path finally opened into a wide, barren plain. The horizon was painted with the faintest glow of dawn. The girl's legs shook with exhaustion, but she did not complain. She had learned long ago that complaints brought punishment. The man stopped and set down the lantern. He knelt on the ground, opened a small sack, and took out a piece of bread. He broke it in half and held one piece out to her. She stared at it like it was poison. Her lips pressed together. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but she feared it was a trick. Slowly, her trembling hand reached out and took it. The bread was rough, dry, but when she bit into it, her eyes filled with tears. She could not remember the last time someone had given her food without cruelty attached. The man ate the other half in silence. His eyes never left the horizon. The girl ate quickly, then clutched the cloak around herself again. The warmth of the bread, the warmth of the cloth, they battled against the cold wall of fear inside her. When the sun finally broke over the hills, spilling golden light across the land, she saw his face more clearly for the first time. His eyes were tired, yes, but they were not cruel. They carried sorrow, deep sorrow, like a man who had lost something he could never recover. She wanted to ask again, why, but she kept her silence. Instead, she followed him as he rose and began walking again. Step by step, chain by chain, she walked behind him into a day she did not understand. And though fear still chained her heart, a question would not leave. Her mind, if he meant to hurt her, why had he given her warmth instead of pain? The barren plain stretched for miles. Dust rose with every step, and the wind carried a dry whistle across the land. The girl's legs shook beneath her. Her body was weak from years of hunger and chains. She wondered if she would collapse before they reached their destination. Yet the human kept walking at a steady pace, always glancing back to make sure she had not fallen too far behind. At last, as the sun sank low, painting the sky with red and gold, they came upon a lonely shack. It stood at the edge of the wasteland, leaning like an old man about to fall. The roof was patched with rusty metal, and the walls were broken in places where the wind had carved. Deep scars. Smoke curled weakly from a crooked chimney. The girl stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart screamed that this was her prison. This was where the man would keep her. Hidden from the world, he would lock her inside, use her as all the others had. The thought made her hands shake, and the chains rattled loudly in the silence. The man pushed the wooden door open. It creaked as though it had not been moved in years. He looked back at her and simply nodded. His face gave no threat, no cruelty, but no promise either. "Come," he said. His voice was low, tired, but steady. Inside, the shack smelled of smoke and earth. A small fire burned in the corner, casting light on a rough wooden table and a single chair. A bed made of straw and blankets rested against the far wall. It was not much, but it was shelter. For the girl, it was still a cage. She stood frozen in the doorway, her chest tight. The man walked to the table and pulled something from a sack. It was food, dried meat, and another piece of bread. He set it on the table, then filled a small tin cup with water. He pushed the cup toward her. "Eat," he said. Her body trembled as she stepped forward. Each movement felt like walking into a trap. She expected him to strike her as soon as she reached for the food, but he did not move. He only sat down on the chair, watching her quietly. The girl reached for the bread. Her thin fingers shook as she tore a small piece and placed it in her mouth. The taste was dry but rich, and tears filled her eyes. She drank the water quickly, her throat burning as it swallowed relief. Still, her mind could not rest. She kept waiting, kept bracing for the moment when he would show his true nature. Why else would a human buy her? Why bring her here instead of leaving her chained in the market? When she had eaten enough to calm her hunger, she backed away. Her silver eyes stayed fixed on him. She pulled the cloak tighter around her body. She whispered in her own language, words too soft for him to hear. "What do you want from me?" The man said nothing. He only leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes. His silence was heavy but not sharp. The fire crackled, filling the shack with warmth. The girl did not know what to do. She was too used to orders, too used to punishment for inaction. She sat on the straw bed, her body curled like a cornered animal. The night grew darker. Outside, the wind howled against the broken walls. Inside, the firelight painted soft shadows across the man's face. He looked older in the glow, his skin lined with sorrow. His hands were rough, scarred like a man who had worked the earth. The girl did not sleep. Her eyes stayed open, watching him. Every time he shifted, her heart jumped. Every time he breathed, she braced. But he did nothing. He did not chain her. He did not shout at her. He did not strike her. He only rested in silence. At one point, the fire grew low. The man stood and she tensed, ready for pain. Instead, he placed another log on the flames, then pulled a blanket from a shelf. He tossed it gently toward her bed. "For warmth," he said. His voice was soft, almost breaking in the middle. The blanket landed near her feet. She stared at it as though it were a weapon. Her chest rose and fell fast. Slowly, she reached for it. Her fingers touched the rough fabric and her heart ached. This small act of care confused her more than cruelty ever had. For years she had lived in chains, where kindness was a lie. But here, in a broken shack at the edge of the wasteland, she was given bread, water, and warmth. No whip, no order, no insult, only silence. As the fire burned low and the man closed his eyes again, the girl curled under the blanket. Her body trembled, not from cold, but from the storm of feelings inside. Her fear battled with something else, something she had forgotten long ago, a fragile spark that she dared not name. Was it hope? She shut her eyes tight, pressing her face against the blanket. Her heart told her it was dangerous to hope, but deep within her chest, the spark refused to die. And as the night passed in that lonely shack, the girl who had braced for pain began to wonder if her chains were not made only of iron, but also of fear. The night was deep and heavy. The wasteland outside the shack was silent except for the endless whisper of the wind. The girl lay on the straw bed, her silver eyes open in the dark. Though the blanket warmed her, her heart was restless. She could not sleep. Every creak of the wooden walls made her flinch. Every flicker of the dying fire made her think of danger. She had been trained by years of pain to expect hurt at every moment, even in silence. The man sat in the chair by the table, his head bowed. His breathing was steady, slow, like someone who had carried too much weight for too long. She hugged the blanket close and listened, waiting. It was only a matter of time, she told herself. The kindness would end, the cruelty would begin. But instead of chains or shouts, the night brought something else. A sudden sound cut through the dark. It was sharp, metallic, like steel scraping stone. The girl sat up quickly, her body stiffened. The man's eyes opened at once, his hand reached for something under the table. From the shadows outside came the sound again, heavier this time. Boots pressing into dirt, voices whispering in a harsh tongue. The girl's breath caught in her throat, her skin crawled with fear. She knew those voices. They were the slavers, the ones who had lost her at the market. They had followed, angry and hungry to reclaim what they thought was theirs. The man stood, his old body moved with surprising speed. From beneath the table, he pulled a long iron staff, more tool than weapon, yet held with the grip of someone ready to fight. He glanced at her once, his eyes sharp but calm. "Stay down," he whispered. The door shook as a heavy hand slammed against it. The girl cried out and pulled the blanket over her face. Her mind screamed that this was the end, that she would be dragged back to the chains. The wood cracked as another blow struck the door. Then, with a roar, the slavers forced their way inside. 3 of them stumbled through, their faces twisted. With greed, their eyes glowed faintly in the firelight, weapons glinting in their hands. They saw her first, curled on the bed. Her chains rattled as she tried to press herself into the wall. "There," one growled. "The master's goods." Before they could move, the man stepped between them and the girl. His figure was small compared to theirs, but his stance was unyielding. The iron staff swung through the air with a crack, smashing against the first slaver's arm. The weapon clattered to the ground. The man's eyes burned with fury, not fear. The girl gasped, her mind spun in disbelief. He was fighting for her, risking his life for her, not as an owner protecting property, but as someone refusing to surrender her to the dark. The shack filled with chaos, the second slaver lunged with a knife. The man caught his wrist and shoved him hard against the wall. The firelight flashed across the blade. The third raised a whip, snapping it toward the girl, but the man's staff blocked it with a sharp clang. Sparks flew in the dim light. The girl covered her ears, but she could not block out the sounds, the thud of fists, the clash of steel, the grunts of pain. Her heart pounded. She wanted to close her eyes, yet something inside her forced her to watch. For the first time in years, she saw someone fighting, not to harm her but to protect her. The first slaver staggered to his feet, blood dripping from his mouth. "You cannot keep her, human," he spat. "She is ours, she is marked." His words made the girl tremble. She remembered the scars burned into her back, the proof of her chains. But the man only answered with a strike of his staff that dropped the slaver to the ground. The fight seemed endless. The walls shook, the fire nearly died. At last, with a final blow, the man forced the last slaver out through the broken door. The raiders cursed and stumbled into the night, carrying their wounded. The wind swallowed their voices as they vanished into the wasteland. Silence returned, heavy and sharp. The man leaned on his staff, his breath ragged. His face was cut, his hands bruised, yet his eyes were steady. He turned to her, not with anger, but with concern. "You are safe," he said, his voice rough but certain. The girl could not move. Her body shook as tears filled her eyes. No one had ever fought for her. No one had ever stood between her and the pain. She clutched the blanket tight and whispered in a broken voice, Why do you protect me?" The man did not answer, not yet. He simply sat back in his chair, his staff across his knees. His chest rose and fell heavily. His silence was no longer empty. It was filled with meaning she could not understand. That night, the girl lay awake long after the fire burned low. Her chain still bound her wrists, but in her heart something had shifted. For the first time in her life, she wondered if she was not only a slave. Perhaps, she thought, she was something worth protecting. And that thought, fragile and trembling, kept her awake in the night of fear. Morning crept slowly across the wasteland. The sky turned pale gray and cold light spilled through the cracks in the broken shack. The girl sat curled on the straw bed, her silver eyes heavy from a sleepless night. Her body still shook from the sounds of the fight. Every crash and shout echoed in her memory like a storm that would not fade. The man sat by the table, his staff leaning against the wall. His face was marked with cuts, his hands swollen from striking steel. Yet he said nothing. He simply watched the flames of the fire as if lost in them. The girl hugged the blanket to her chest. Her chains clinked softly as she moved. She wanted to speak, but fear sealed her lips. She wanted to ask why he had fought for her, why he had not let the slavers take her back. No one had ever risked so much for her before. Her mind could not accept it. At last, he broke the silence. His voice was low, rough with exhaustion. "You should eat," he said. He pushed a small piece of bread across the table toward her. The girl hesitated, staring at it as though it were a trick. But hunger won. She moved slowly, took the bread, and ate. When she finished, her eyes lifted to him again. This time she could not keep the question buried. Her voice shook like a child's. "Why did you buy me?" she asked. Why fight for me?" The man's eyes closed for a moment, his chest rose with a long breath. When he opened them again, there was sorrow in his gaze, not anger, not cruelty, but a deep sadness. "Because once," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "I had a daughter." The girl froze. Her hands tightened around the blanket. A daughter. She leaned closer, her heart racing with questions she dared not ask. "She was taken," the man continued. His voice was heavy, each word dragged out like a wound. "Slavers came when I was away. They burned my home. They took her. I searched. I begged. I paid all I had, but I was too late. I never saw her again." His eyes fell to the ground. His hands clenched into fists. "I failed her." The girl's breath caught in her throat. For the first time she saw his pain, not as a shadow, but as a wound that had never healed. He was not just a man who had bought her. He was a father who had lost everything. "When I saw you in the market," he said, his voice trembling, "I saw her face. I saw my child broken and afraid. I could not walk away again. I could not fail a second time." Tears blurred the girl's vision. Her heart twisted with emotions she could not name. No one had ever seen her as more than property. Yet here was a human who looked at her and saw something else. Someone else. Still, fear whispered in her mind. Was it pity? Was she only a shadow of his lost child? Did he only want to replace what he had lost? Her lips trembled as she whispered, "But I am not her." The man nodded slowly. His eyes held no denial. "I know," he said. "You are not my daughter. You are yourself. You deserve to live free, not chained like an animal." His voice grew firmer. "No one should suffer what she suffered, what you suffered." The words struck her like light piercing through the dark. Free. She had heard the word before. but it had never belonged to her. She shook her head quickly, tears spilling. "I cannot be free," she whispered. "I am marked. I am owned. I am nothing." The man stood, his chair scraping against the floor. He stepped toward her slowly, not with anger, but with care. He knelt before her, his rough hands reached for her wrists. For a moment she flinched, expecting pain, but instead, he pulled a small tool from his pocket and began working at the locks on her chains. The girl gasped. "No," she whispered. "They will kill you. The slavers will return. You cannot." The lock snapped. The iron cuff fell away. Her skin, raw and scarred, felt the air for the first time in years. The second chain dropped with another sharp click. She stared at her bare wrists in disbelief. Tears fell freely down her cheeks. "You are not nothing," the man said, his voice steady. "You are alive. That is enough." The girl covered her face with her hands, sobbing silently. She had dreamed of freedom but never believed it could come. And now a human of all people had given it to her. Yet even as she wept, fear still lingered. The slavers would not stop. They would come again. They would destroy everything to take her back. She looked at him through blurred vision. "They will come, they will not let me go." The man's gaze hardened, his hand tightened on the staff. "Then let them come," he said. "They will not take you, not while I stand." The girl's chest ached with something new, something dangerous. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust. But trust had always been a weapon against her, and yet his words settled inside her like a fragile flame. That night, as the fire burned low, she lay awake with no chains on her wrists. Her body trembled with fear, but her heart carried something else too. For the first time, she dared to imagine a life not as a slave, but as a person. And in the quiet of the broken shack, the truth of the human's sorrow bound her heart to his. The morning sun rose pale over the wasteland. Its light fell across the shack and the broken fence that marked its edge. Inside, the girl sat by the fire, her wrists bare for the first time in years. The iron cuffs lay on the table, silent proof that her chains were gone. She touched her skin again and again, as though testing if the freedom was real. The man stood outside, leaning on his staff, his eyes searched the horizon. The night had been quiet, too quiet, and silence in the wasteland was never a good sign. He knew the slavers would return. Men like that did not forget. They did not forgive when someone stole from their greed. The girl stepped to the doorway, the cloak hanging around her thin shoulders. "They are coming, aren't they?" she whispered. Her voice trembled. She wanted the answer to be no, but in her heart she already knew. The man did not turn. He only nodded. His voice was low, steady. "Yes, they will come." Her breath caught. Fear tightened inside her chest. She had just begun to believe she could live, and now the shadow of chains rose again. "You should let me go," she said quickly. "If I run, they will follow me, not you. You can still be safe." He turned to her then, his eyes firm. "I will not let you face them alone." His grip tightened on the staff. "I lost my daughter once. I will not lose you to them." The words struck. Her strong and heavy, she felt both warmth and pain. Why would he risk his life for her? She had been taught she was nothing, but in his eyes she saw something different, something she was afraid to name. The day passed in tense silence. The man prepared the shack as best he could. He barred the door, stacked wood near the fire, and sharpened a rusty blade he had hidden in a chest. The girl helped where she could, though her hands shook. Her body was weak, but she carried water, gathered scraps, and stood by his side. As dusk fell, the wind carried a sound across the barren plain, horses, boots, and the clang of weapons. The girl froze. Her heart raced, shadows stretched across the horizon, and soon dark figures appeared. The slavers had returned, and they had not come alone. A dozen strong with whips, chains, and blades, the shack seemed to shrink before the storm that approached. The man stepped outside, planting his staff firmly in the dirt. His body was small against their numbers, but his stance was unbroken. The girl stood behind him, clutching the cloak, her voice shaking. "There are too many. They will kill you." He looked back at her once. His tired eyes were calm. "Stay behind me," he said. Then he faced the riders. The leader dismounted, his face twisted with rage. "You stole from us, human," he shouted, his voice sharp as steel. "The girl is marked. She belongs to us. Hand her over, and maybe we will let you crawl away with your life." The man's voice was firm. "She is free." Laughter broke from the slavers, cruel and loud. "Free?" the leader sneered. "No one leaves our chains. She is ours until she dies." He drew a long whip from his belt, the same whip that had cut across the girl's back many times before. The sight made her tremble and step back. Her scars seemed to burn again. The man lifted his staff, his voice carried like a stone thrown into the storm. "She is not yours." The slavers roared. Their boots thundered as they charged. The ground shook under their weight. The girl cried out, "No!" Her voice cracked. But her body refused to move. She could not run, not when he stood for her. The first wave struck. Blades flashed, whips cracked. The man swung his staff with all his strength, knocking one raider to the dirt. Another came and the staff cracked. Against his ribs, the girl's heart pounded with each blow. Each sound of battle carved deeper into her chest. But they were too many. The staff struck true, but cuts opened on his arms. A blade sliced across his shoulder. He stumbled but did not fall. His breath came heavy, yet his eyes never left them. He fought with fury born of grief. The girl screamed as two slavers broke past him and grabbed her. Rough hands pulled her forward. The whip snapped above her head. Her cloak tore. She struggled, but their grip was iron. Tears streamed down her face. She cried out, "Help!" The man turned, his roar breaking through the night. With a final burst of strength, he drove his staff into the raiders holding her. One fell, the other stumbled. He grabbed her hand, pulled her behind him. His chest heaved, his body bled, but still he stood. The slaver leader snarled, his whip curling in his hand. "You will die for this," he spat. He raised the weapon high. The girl clutched the man's cloak, her heart breaking. She had never been worth saving, yet he stood like a wall between her and the chains. The battle raged, the shack shook. The fire inside burned low. The man fought until his strength was nearly gone. His knees buckled, his hands shook. Still he whispered through blood and breath, "You are free." The girl's tears fell onto the dirt. Her heart screamed. For the first time she saw her life not as chains but as a gift. She could not let him fall. She grabbed the fallen blade from the ground. Her hands trembled, but she lifted it. She faced the slavers with silver eyes burning. That night the hunters returned. But they found not a slave. They found a girl who had learned what it meant to be protected, and for the first time she was ready to fight for herself. The night was alive with fire and fury. The shack groaned as blades clashed, wood splintered, and the wind carried the cries of battle. The girl stood trembling, the sword heavy in her hands. Her wrists were free, but her heart was chained by fear. In front of her, the human still fought, his body scarred and bleeding, yet he would not fall. The slavers pressed harder. Their leader cracked his whip, snarling like a beast. "She is ours," he shouted. "No man can keep her." His voice was cruel, his eyes burning with greed, but the man answered with a voice that shook like thunder. "She is free." The words gave her strength. The girl's body trembled, but her silver eyes grew brighter. For so long she had been told she was nothing, an object, a tool. But here was someone willing to bleed and break to prove otherwise. Her fear turned to fire when one slaver lunged. Toward the man's back, the girl cried out and swung the blade. The strike was clumsy but sharp enough to slice across his arm. The raider staggered, cursing. The girl gasped at what she had done, but the man's eyes met hers, filled with pride, not anger. "Good," he whispered through heavy breath. "Stand!" Together they fought. His staff struck true, her blade flashed in the firelight. The slavers did not expect her to resist, and their laughter turned to rage. Blow after blow, they pressed forward, but the man did not yield. The girl refused to let go of the sword. At last, the leader himself stormed forward, his whip cracked through the air. Wrapping around the man's staff with a savage pull, he tore it from his hands. The man stumbled, blood dripping from his wounds. The leader raised his blade high, ready to end it. The girl's heart stopped. Time slowed. She saw the man's weary body, his knees trembling. She knew that one strike would take him away. She screamed, running forward. Her sword met the whip, slicing it apart. Sparks flew as steel clashed. The leader snarled and turned on her, his eyes full of hate. But, in that instant, the man surged up with one final burst of strength. He grabbed his broken staff and drove it hard into the leader's chest. The raider gasped, falling to the dirt with wide eyes. His men froze, their leader broken before them. One by one they stepped back, their courage shattered. With curses and growls they retreated into the night, carrying their wounded. Silence fell at last. The girl dropped the sword, her body shaking. Her breath came in sharp gasps. Her silver eyes turned to the man. He was still standing, but barely. His staff was cracked, his hands bled. His chest heaved with every breath. She rushed to his side, holding his arm to steady him. "You saved me," she whispered. Her voice broke. "Again and again you saved me." He looked down at her, his eyes filled with sorrow and something gentler. "I only gave what I could not give her," he said softly. "I could not save my daughter, but I saved you." Her tears spilled onto the dirt. She shook her head. "No, you did more than that. You gave me life." Her hands clutched his cloak. "I thought I was nothing, but you showed me I was worth fighting for." The man lowered himself to the ground, his body too weak to stand. The girl knelt beside him, her heart breaking. "You cannot leave me," she whispered. "Not now." He placed a rough hand against her cheek. His touch was warm despite the blood. "I am not leaving," he said. "But if I fall, you must live. You must walk free. Promise me that." Her chest ached. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to say she would not leave him. But she saw the truth in his eyes. He was not asking for himself. He was asking for her future, for her life. "I promise," she whispered. Her tears fell onto his hand. The night grew quiet. The fire burned low. They sat together in the wrecked shack, scarred but alive. When morning came, the wasteland was painted in gold. The girl stepped outside, the man beside her. His body leaned on the staff, but his eyes still carried strength. She looked at the horizon. The world stretched wide and endless. For the first time, the chains were gone from her wrists, from her body, from her heart. She turned to him, her voice steady though, soft. "I do not want to leave." His eyes widened slightly. "You are free. You can go anywhere. You owe me nothing." She shook her head. Her silver eyes glistened. "I choose to stay, not as a slave, not as property, but as family." The man's breath caught. For a moment he could not speak. Then, his eyes closed and a single tear slipped down his scarred cheek. He nodded slowly. "Then we will walk together." And so the girl who had braced for pain found a different path. She was no longer a chain-bound shadow in a market of cruelty. She was no longer owned, beaten, or forgotten. She was free. And in her freedom, she found a bond stronger than chains. The human and the alien walked into the wasteland. Their steps, slow but steady. The world had stolen much from them both, but in each other they had found something it could never take: hope.